Touch her again, the voice said, and you won't leave this room with your reputation. The glass in Robert Sinclair's hand froze halfway to his lips. 300 guests turned at once. Emma Brooks stood frozen, another man's fingers still locked around her wrist, and for the first time in her entire life, the most powerful man in the room was fighting for her. Nobody in that ballroom knew his name meant anything to her. Nobody, including Emma, knew why. Before we go any further, hit subscribe and follow this channel so you don't miss a single moment of this story. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Emma Brooks had one rule for nights like this: stay near the wall, keep her eyes down, and count the minutes until she could go home. She wasn't supposed to be at the Whitfield Foundation Gala at all. She was a records clerk, not a guest. She'd been asked to deliver a stack of donor files to the event coordinator, nothing more. But the coordinator had vanished into the crowd, and Emma had been left standing at the edge of a ballroom filled with more wealth than she'd see in 10 lifetimes, clutching a manila folder like a shield. She told herself she'd leave the moment the files were handed off. She didn't belong here. Not in this dress borrowed from her roommate. Not among women wearing jewelry that cost more than her yearly rent. Not under chandeliers that made her feel smaller with every passing second. She didn't notice Robert Sinclair watching her until it was too late. "You're new," he said, sliding in beside her with a drink in each hand, offering her one she didn't take. "I'd remember a face like yours." "I'm just delivering paperwork," Emma said quietly, stepping back half a pace. "I should go." "Nonsense." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nobody just leaves my sister's gala. Stay. Talk to me." Emma's stomach tightened. She recognized the tone, the kind that treated a woman's discomfort as an obstacle, not a signal. She'd heard it before from men who assumed a soft voice meant an easy yes. "I really do need to go," she said, firmer this time. Sinclair laughed, low and amused, like she'd told a joke. "Come on. One dance, that's all." "No thank you." The word landed wrong. Emma saw it in his face, the flicker of surprise. Then something colder underneath it. Men like Robert Sinclair weren't used to hearing no, and when they heard it, they didn't absorb it. They escalated. "You know," he said, stepping closer, voice dropping so only she could hear. "Girls who work these events usually understand how this works. You smile. You're pleasant. You don't embarrass people. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone." Emma's heart was hammering now. She glanced past him, looking for an exit. For anyone who might notice, nobody did. 300 people in that room, and not one of them saw her. "Then stop acting like you're too good for this." His hand closed around her wrist. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't playful. Emma felt the grip tighten, felt her folder of donor files slip from her fingers and scatter across the marble floor. Papers fanning out like startled birds. "Let go of me," she said, and her voice cracked not from weakness, but from fury, from 26 years of swallowing moments exactly like this one. "Relax," Sinclair said, laughing for the small circle of guests who had begun to notice now, who found it entertaining, who did nothing. "She's dramatic. Look at her." Someone chuckled. Someone else murmured something about the help getting ideas above her station. Emma felt her face burn, humiliation crawling up her spine. And she yanked her arm, but his grip only tightened. "I said," she gasped, "let go." And then the room went silent, not gradually, not in waves, all at once. Like someone had cut the sound from the world. Emma didn't understand why at first. She thought maybe she'd imagined it, some trick of adrenaline narrowing her senses. But then she saw it, the way every head in the ballroom turned toward the same point, the way champagne glasses paused midair, the way even the string quartet's bows stopped moving across their instruments. A man was walking toward them. He wasn't rushing. That was the strangest part. He moved like a man who had never once in his life needed to hurry, because the world simply rearranged itself around wherever he decided to go. Tall, dark-suited, unremarkable at a glance until you saw his eyes and understood that stillness like that wasn't calm. It was control. Emma had no idea who he was, but Robert Sinclair did. She felt it before she understood it, the sudden tension in Sinclair's grip, the way his fingers twitched like he wanted to let go but was too proud to do it first. His face had gone the color of old paper. "Caldwell," Sinclair said, and his voice, so confident seconds ago, now came out thin. "I didn't realize you were." "Touch her again, Nathan," Caldwell said, "and you won't leave this room with your reputation." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was loud. Deafening, the kind of silence that has weight. Emma could hear her own pulse in her ears. She could hear the faint hiss of the fountain across the room. She could hear 300 people holding their breath at once. Sinclair's hand fell away from her wrist like it had been burned. "Nathan, this was just a misunderstanding," he stammered, forcing a laugh that convinced no one. "We were just talking, weren't we, sweetheart?" Emma didn't answer. She was too stunned to speak. Rubbing the red marks blooming across her wrist, staring at the stranger who had just stopped a room with 11 words. Nathan didn't look at Sinclair again. He turned to Emma instead, and something in his expression shifted, the coldness melting into something Emma couldn't name. Concern, recognition, something older than tonight. "Are you hurt?" he asked, quiet enough that only she could hear it. "I know," Emma managed. "I don't. Who are you?" He didn't answer that question. Not yet. Instead, he crouched, gathering the scattered papers from the floor with his own hands, a billionaire, kneeling on marble in a $5,000 suit, collecting a records clerk's donor files while 300 of Chicago's wealthiest citizens watched in disbelief. "You dropped these," he said, straightening, holding the folder out to her. Emma took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, "but I still don't understand." Emma. Her name. He knew her name. She hadn't told him. She hadn't told anyone in this building her name. The floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath her feet. "How do you know my?" "Not here," Nathan said, and for the first time, she heard something almost like urgency in his voice. He glanced around the ballroom at Sinclair, pale and humiliated, at the whispering crowd, at a woman near the bar already reaching for her phone to record whatever happened next. "Please, come with me, just for a few minutes. I'll explain everything." "Why would I go anywhere with a stranger?" Emma said, some of her spine returning now that the immediate threat had passed. "Who apparently already knows more about me than I'm comfortable with." A small, unexpected, almost smile touched the corner of Nathan's mouth. "Fair," he said. "That's fair," he exhaled, glancing once more at the crowd still watching them like a live broadcast. "My name is Nathan Caldwell. 20 years ago, your father saved my life." Emma went very still. "My father," she said slowly, "died in a car accident when I was 6 years old." "That's what you were old," Nathan said, and his voice had changed again, quieter now, heavier, like each word cost him something. "It's not what happened." The room seemed to tilt a second time. "What are you talking about?" Emma's voice rose sharp with sudden fear, sudden anger. "You don't get to say something like that and then." "I know," Nathan said. "I know I don't get to say it like this, in a place like this, in front of people like this. It's not how I planned it. Nothing about tonight was how I planned it." He glanced, briefly, at Sinclair, who was still standing frozen a few feet away, humiliation etched into every line of his face. "But I couldn't stand there and watch him put his hands on you. Not after everything your father sacrificed to make sure I'd have a life worth living." Ma's chest was tight, her thoughts scattering in a dozen directions. Every instinct told her to walk away, to call this exactly what it looked like, a wealthy man's strange, invasive game. But something in his eyes stopped her. Something that didn't match the arrogance she'd expect from a man like him. It looked almost like grief. 5 minutes, Nathan said. "That's all I'm asking. My car is outside. You can leave the second you want to. But I think you deserve to know the truth about your father before you hear it from anyone else." Behind them, the murmuring crowd had grown louder, no longer bothering to hide their staring. Someone near the entrance was already whispering the words Nathan called Welland Records' clerk, like the beginning of tomorrow's headline. Emma felt exposed in a way she'd never experienced. Humiliated and terrified, and beneath all of it desperate for an answer to a question she hadn't known to ask until tonight. "If you're lying to me," she said, her voice shaking but steady, "I will make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are." "I'm not lying," Nathan said. "I've spent 20 years trying to find the right way to tell you this. I'm sorry it happened like this. I'm sorry you had to find out because of him." His eyes flicked, cold again, toward Sinclair. "But I'm not sorry I stopped him." Emma looked down at the folder in her hands, at the wrist still throbbing where Sinclair's fingers had dug in, at the hundreds of eyes still watching her from every corner of the ballroom. Then she looked back up at the stranger who somehow knew her name, her father, and the truth that had been buried for 20 years. "Okay," she said quietly. 5 minutes. Behind them, as they walked toward the doors, the whispers in the ballroom rose into a roar that, by morning, would be a headline in every paper in Chicago. But Emma didn't hear any of it. She was too busy trying to understand how a stranger's 11 words had just silenced an entire room, and what kind of truth could possibly be waiting for her in the back of his car. Nathan's car pulled away from the curb before Emma could second-guess her decision, the ballroom's golden light shrinking behind them, until it was just another blur among 100 others. She sat rigid against the leather seat, her folder of donor files clutched to her chest, like the only solid thing left in a world that had just tilted sideways. "You said my father saved your life," she said, breaking the silence first. 20 years ago. "I need you to start there." Nathan didn't look at her right away. He was staring out the window, jaw-eyed, like a man rehearsing a speech he delivered 1,000 times in his head and never once out loud. "I was 12, he said finally. "My father ran a shipping company out of the South Side. Not big yet, not what it became. But big enough that people noticed. Big enough that some very dangerous men decided it would be profitable to take his son and hold him for ransom." Emma's breath caught. "You were kidnapped?" "For 9 days. Nathan's voice stayed level, but something underneath it wasn't. "They kept me in a warehouse near the rail yards. I remember the cold more than anything. And I remember being certain, every single hour, that I was going to die there. That doesn't explain my father. He worked security at the yard," Nathan said. "Night shift. Nobody important, at least that's what everyone thought. But he heard something he wasn't supposed to hear, saw something he wasn't supposed to see. And instead of walking away and pretending he hadn't, he came back that night with a tire iron and no plan except getting the kid out alive." Emma's hands had gone cold around the folder. "You're talking about my father like he was some kind of action hero. He worked in a records office. He filed paperwork. He was quiet. He didn't want anyone to know," Nathan said. "That was the whole point. He made me promise before the police even arrived that I'd never say his name to anyone. He said a man like him couldn't afford the kind of attention a story like that would bring. He said it would put a target on his family." The car went quiet except for the hum of tires on wet pavement. Emma stared at her own reflection in the window, trying to reconcile the father she remembered soft-spoken, tired after long shifts, humming off-key while he made her breakfast with a man who had walked into a warehouse to save a stranger's child. "If this is true," she said slowly, "why would anyone kill him for it? Why would anyone even know?" Nathan's jaw flexed. "Because the men who took me weren't some random opportunists. They were connected, organized. And when I disappeared and then reappeared 9 days later, alive with no explanation anyone could pin down, they started asking questions. It didn't take them long to find out a yard security guard had gone missing from his post that same night, then quietly transferred departments a month later. So they figured it out. They figured it out, Nathan confirmed. And 3 years after that, your father's car went off Route 41 at 2 in the morning. On a night with clear roads and no ice. He finally turned to look at her. The official report called it driver fatigue. Emma felt something crack open in her chest. Old and unhealed. My mother told me it was an accident. She told me that for 20 years, she believed it was safer that way. For you, safer. Emma's voice shook. You're telling me my mother has been lying to me my entire life to protect me from a truth you just decided to hand me in the back of a car. 20 minutes after some stranger grabbed my wrist at a party. I know how this sounds. Do you? Emma's composure finally cracked, tears burning at the edges of her eyes. More furious than sad, because from where I'm sitting, a billionaire I've never met just told me my father was murdered. My mother's been lying to me since I was 6. And somehow you've known all of this about me? About him for years? And you never once thought to say anything until tonight? Nathan absorbed the accusation without flinching. Which somehow made it worse. You're right to be angry. I'm not looking for your permission to be angry. I know that too. Emma pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, forcing the tears back, forcing her breathing to slow. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but sharper. Prove it. All of it. I'm not going to sit here and rearrange my entire life around a story with nothing behind it. Nathan reached into his jacket and produced a small leather case, worn soft at the corners like it had traveled with him for decades. He opened it and held it out to her. Inside was a photograph. Emma took it with unsteady hands. It was old, the color slightly faded, the edges gone soft. A boy, unmistakably Nathan, maybe 12 years old. Gangly and palened, clutching a blanket around his shoulders, like he still felt the warehouse cold, stood next to a man in a security uniform. Emma's stomach dropped straight through the floor of the car. She knew that face. She'd know it anywhere, the same tired eyes, the same crooked half-smile he wore in every photo she had left of him. All of them kept in a shoebox in her closet because they were too painful to frame. That's him, she whispered. That's my father. That's the night it happened. Nathan said. Someone from the department took it before they drove me home. I've kept it for 20 years. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the only proof I had that any of it was real. Emma stared at the photograph, at her father's arm resting protectively across a frightened boy's shoulders, and felt the last of her defenses give out. Why didn't you find us sooner? She said, barely audible. If you knew all this, if you've had this photo for 20 years, why did it take until now? Because I did find you, Nathan said. Years ago. I found your mother. I found you. And I made a decision I've regretted every day since, but one I still believe was right at the time. What decision? To stay away. Emma looked up sharply. You knew who I was and you just watched, from a distance. For how long? Long enough to know when your mother's clinic bills got to high one winter and an anonymous donation appeared the following week, Nathan said quietly. Long enough to know which scholarship fund quietly covered part of your tuition when the records department paid it. Long enough to make sure the landlord who tried to illegally raise your rent 2 years ago suddenly decided against it. Emma's mouth fell open. That was you. I told myself I was protecting you, Nathan said. The men responsible for your father's death, some of them were still active, still dangerous. I spent years dismantling that network piece by piece, quietly, without ever putting your name anywhere near mine. Because the one thing your father asked of me before I ever thanked him properly was to keep his family safe. I thought the safest thing I could do was stay a stranger. And tonight, Nathan's expression shifted, something raw breaking through the careful control he'd worn since the moment he crossed that ballroom. Tonight I watched a man put his hands on you the same way he'd put his hands on anyone he thought couldn't fight back. And I realized I'd spent 20 years protecting you from a distance, while men like Robert Sinclair got to stand 3 feet away and humiliate you in front of a room full of people who did nothing." His voice hardened. "I wasn't going to stay a stranger for one more second." Emma sat with that for a long moment, the photograph still trembling slightly in her hands. "You called me your future wife," she said, suddenly remembering, the words hitting her fresh all over again. "In front of everyone. Why would you say something like that if none of this was ever supposed to be about?" "It wasn't a proposal," Nathan cut in quickly, something almost embarrassed flickering across his face for the first time all night. "It was a declaration. The only language people like Robert Sinclair actually understand is power. And status and consequence. I needed every person in that room to know, immediately and permanently, that touching you again would cost them everything. I'm sorry if it frightened you. I meant every word as protection. Nothing more unless someday you wanted it to be. I didn't know what to do with that." Her mind was still catching up to her father, to the murder disguised as an accident, to 20 years of quiet deaths she never knew existed. Romance felt like a language from another planet entirely. "I need to see my mother," she said instead. "Tonight. Right now. If she's been carrying this for 20 years. I'm not going to sit in a car with a stranger while she's at home not knowing any of this has come out." "Of course," Nathan said immediately, already reaching for the intercom to the driver. "I'll take you there myself." "No." Emma's voice was firm, steadier than she felt. "I need to talk to her alone first. She deserves that much, whatever she's hidden from me." Something like respect passed briefly across Nathan's face. "I understand." The car slowed at a red light, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The photograph still resting in Emma's lap, her father's steady eyes staring up at her like he'd been waiting 20 years for her to finally see him clearly. "One more thing," Nathan said quietly, just as the light turned green. "Whatever your mother tells you tonight, there's a part of the story, even she might not know." Emma's head snapped toward him. "What do you mean?" Nathan hesitated, and for the first time since the ballroom, Emma saw something close to fear cross his face, not for himself, but for what he was about to say. "The man who ordered the hit that killed your father," he said slowly, "wasn't some faceless criminal who disappeared after the fact." "Then who was it?" Nathan's eyes held her, steady and grim. "He's still alive, and he was in that ballroom tonight." Emma's whole body went still. "In the ballroom," she repeated. "Tonight. You mean he was there? He was standing feet away from me and I had no idea." "I believe so," Nathan said carefully. "I haven't confirmed it with absolute certainty yet, but I've spent years tracking the money, the connections, the men who benefited when your father stopped talking. And one of them has spent the last decade rebuilding himself as a respectable philanthropist. Gala circuits, charity boards, the kind of man people shake hands with and never think to question." "Give me a name." "Not tonight," Nathan said. And when Emma opened her mouth to argue, he held up a hand, not sharp, but firm. "Not because I don't trust you, because the moment I say it out loud, there's no walking it back. I need to be certain before I hand you a name that could get you killed for knowing it." Emma sat with that, her pulse hammering. The photograph of her father still warm from where her hands had been gripping it too tightly. "You've been carrying all of this alone for years," she said quietly. "That's insane. It was the only way I knew how to keep you safe." The car pulled up outside a modest brick duplex on the north side. Porch light flickering, the same house Emma had grown up in, the same crooked mailbox her father had never gotten around to fixing before he died. She stared at it like she was seeing it for the first time. "I need to do this alone," she said again, hand already on the door. "I'll be right here," Nathan said, "as long as you need." Emma didn't wait for anything else. She walked up the path with the photograph clutched against her chest, knocked twice, and waited, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her mother, Diane Brooks, opened the door in her row. hair pinned back, reading glasses still perched on her nose from whatever crossword she'd abandoned on the kitchen table. Her smile faded the instant she saw Emma's face. Honey, what's wrong? What happened? Dad didn't die in a car accident, Emma said, and the words came out cracked, raw, unrehearsed. Someone murdered him because he saved a little boy's life 20 years ago, and you knew. You've known this whole time. Diane's face went the color of chalk. For a long moment she didn't say anything at all. Just stood frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Come inside, she whispered finally. Please, not out here. Emma stepped past her into the small living room she'd grown up in, the same faded couch. The same photographs on the mantel, her father's crooked smile in every single one of them, smiling at her now like he had a secret he'd been dying to tell her for 2 decades. How did you find out? Diane asked, sinking into a chair like her legs had simply stopped working. Nathan Caldwell, Emma said. The billionaire. He says Dad saved his life. He has a photo. He knows things about me nobody outside this family should know. Diane closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were wet. I always knew this day would come eventually. I just prayed I'd be the one to tell you, not some stranger in a car. So it's true. Emma's voice cracked down the middle. All of it. Sit down, Diane said softly. Please, Emma. Sit down, and I'll tell you everything I know. Emma sat, every muscle in her body wound tight, waiting. Your father came home that night shaking, Diane began, her voice trembling with the weight of 20 buried years. I'd never seen him like that. Not before, not after. He told me he'd done something he couldn't undo, something that might put us all in danger, and that I couldn't ask him anything else about it, not then, not ever. I begged him. He wouldn't say a word beyond that he'd helped save a child's life and that some very dangerous people were now aware of his face. Did you know it was Nathan Caldwell? Not then. Nobody knew the Caldwell name back then. His father's company was still small, still fighting for contracts. It wasn't until years later, after your father was gone, that I saw Nathan's face in a business magazine and felt something cold settle in my stomach. I never had proof. I had a feeling. And feelings don't pay the bills or bring your father back, so I buried it. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because telling you meant you'd go looking, Diane said, tears sliding freely down her face now. And I couldn't lose you the way I lost him. I made peace with lying to you if it meant you got to grow up safe. Ordinary, unremarkable to the kind of people who kill men for knowing too much. Emma felt her chest cave in around the grief sharpened sudden. 20 years overdue. He died protecting a stranger's child, she whispered. And you had to protect me by pretending it never happened. I had to protect you by burying the man I loved twice. Diane said, once in the ground and once in every conversation I never let us have. Emma crossed the room and knelt in front of her mother's chair, taking both of her trembling hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, just two women finally grieving the same man together, 20 years late. There's more, Emma said eventually, her voice steadying. Nathan thinks the man responsible, the one who gave the order, was at the gala tonight. Someone who spent years rebuilding himself into a respected name. He wouldn't tell me who. Diane's hands went rigid in Emma's grip. Then he already knows something he's not telling you. Men like Nathan Caldwell don't say things like that unless they're already certain. He said he needed proof first. That he couldn't risk saying a name that could get me killed just for knowing it. He's protecting you, Diane said slowly, something shifting in her expression, not quite trust, but the beginning of it. The same way he's apparently been protecting you for years. From what you've told me, the donations, the rent, the scholarship. You knew about that. I suspected, Diane admitted. I never had proof either. Just a strange feeling every time something impossible worked out exactly when we needed it most. Emma sat back on her heels, overwhelmed. 20 years of quiet. Invisible protection suddenly visible all at once, stitched together into a picture she'd never known existed. He called me his future wife tonight. In front of the entire ballroom. Diane's eyebrows lifted sharply through her ears. He did what? It's not what it sounds like, Emma said quickly. He said it was a declaration, not a proposal. A way to make sure nobody would ever dare touch me again. He said it was about protection, not romance. And do you believe him? Emma hesitated, surprised by how long it took her to answer. I don't know what I believe right now. 2 hours ago, I thought Dad died in an accident, and I had no idea a stranger had been quietly rewriting parts of my life from a distance for years. I don't know what's real anymore. He is real, Diane said quietly, nodding toward the window, where Nathan's car still idled at the curb, patient. Unmoving, exactly where Emma had left him. A man like that doesn't wait outside a stranger's house at midnight for nothing. Emma turned to look. And through the gap in the curtains she could see him sitting there in the dark, giving her space, giving her mother space, not once trying to insert himself into a moment that wasn't his. Something in her chest loosened slightly at the sight. I need to go back out there, she said. I need answers. I need to know who was in that room tonight. And I need to know what Nathan's planning to do about it. Emma. Diane caught her wrist before she could stand, her grip surprisingly strong. Whatever happens next, whoever this man turns out to be, promise me you'll let Nathan handle the danger. Your father died because he tried to be the hero alone. Don't make his mistake. Emma swallowed hard, the weight of that promise settling heavy in her chest. I promise. She kissed her mother's forehead, gathered the folder and the photograph, and walked back out into the cool night air, back toward the car where Nathan was waiting exactly as he'd said he would be. He rolled the window down as she approached, studying her face carefully, searching for damage, for tears, for anything he needed to brace against. She confirmed it, Emma said, sliding into the passenger seat. All of it. She suspected it was you protecting us for years. She never had proof. Just a feeling. I'm sorry it took this long to tell you the truth myself, Nathan said quietly. I don't want apologies right now. Emma turned to face him fully. Something new and sharp in her voice, not fear anymore, but resolve. I want a name. I want to know who murdered my father and who was standing in that ballroom tonight, pretending to be respectable while wearing a $5,000 suit. Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a long moment he said nothing, staring out at the dark street like he was weighing exactly how much truth Emma could carry in a single night. I need 72 hours, he said finally, to be absolutely certain before I say his name out loud. Because once I do, there's no going back for either of us. And if you're wrong, I'm not wrong, Nathan said, something cold and certain settling behind his eyes. I've spent 20 years making sure I'd never be wrong about this. Emma studied him for a long moment, the billionaire who'd knelt on a ballroom floor to gather her scattered papers, who'd quietly paid her mother's medical bills without ever asking for thanks, who was now sitting beside her promising to hand her the identity of her father's killer within 3 days. 72 hours, she repeated. And then you tell me everything. No more secrets. Nathan agreed. Neither of them noticed as the car finally pulled away from the curb. The dark sedan parked 2 houses down that had been sitting there, engine off, lights out, since the moment they'd arrived. Emma barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face in that faded photograph, young Nathan's trembling shoulders under his arm, and somewhere underneath it all, the stranger's silhouette she couldn't picture but somehow already feared. By the second day, the story had exploded. Someone at the gala had filmed the entire confrontation, Sinclair's hand around her wrist, Nathan's voice cutting through the ballroom. The two of them walking out together while 300 of Chicago's elite watched in stunned silence. The video had over 4 million views by morning. Emma's name was trending next to Nathan's, and reporters had already found her apartment building. I can't leave my own home, she said into the phone. pacing her tiny kitchen, blinds shut tight. There are people camped outside with cameras, Nathan. This is insane. I know, Nathan said, his voice tight with something that sounded almost like guilt. I'm sending a car. You're not staying there another night. Not with your face plastered across every local station in the city. I'm not running from my own apartment because of a scandal you created. I didn't create it, Nathan said. Sinclair did. The moment he decided grabbing you was acceptable behavior. I just made sure there were consequences. A pause. But you're right that I underestimated how fast this would move. I'm sorry. Emma pressed her palm against her forehead. Exhaustion and adrenaline angled together into something that felt like standing on a ledge. Did you find him? The 72 hours, it's been 40 already. Do you have a name? Nathan's silence lasted a beat too long. I have a name, he said finally. I need a few more hours to be certain before I say it out loud. I promised you no more secrets, and I meant it. But this one, Emma, this one is going to change everything, and I need you sitting down when I tell you. Not standing in a kitchen with reporters outside your window. You're scaring me. Good, Nathan said quietly. You should be scared. I need you to be careful. Not brave. Not like he stopped himself. Not like my father, Emma finished for him, her voice hollow. Yes. She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the counter. Fine. Send the car. But the second you know something, I want to hear it from you first, not from a headline. You have my word. The car arrived 20 minutes later, and Emma left through the back stairwell to avoid the small crowd gathered out front, her heart pounding the entire walk to the alley. She didn't relax until the doors closed and the driver pulled smoothly into traffic, putting distance between her and the chaos her life had become in under 48 hours. She was still catching her breath when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ask Nathan Caldwell what really happened to his father's company 18 years ago. Ask him who benefited most when Marcus Caldwell died. Some heroes have more blood on their hands than the men they claim to expose. Emma stared at the screen, her stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. She read it 3 times, then a 4th, before she finally typed back with shaking fingers. Who is this? No response came. The message simply sat there, glowing accusation on a blank screen, and Emma felt something in her chest crack right down the center, not fear this time, but doubt, creeping in cold, wrapping itself around every soft feeling she'd allowed herself toward Caldwell in the last 2 days. When she arrived at the address Nathan had given her, a private, unmarked building downtown, far more understated than she'd expected from a man of his wealth, she found him waiting in the lobby, already reading the tension on her face before she said a word. What happened? He said immediately. Emma held up her phone, showing him the message without a word. Nathan read it twice. His jaw tightened, and something moved behind his eyes that Emma hadn't seen before, not surprise, but recognition, like he'd been expecting exactly this, undreading it anyway. Is it true? Emma asked, her voice low and dangerous. Did something happen to your father's company? Did you benefit when he died? My father didn't die 18 years ago, Nathan said carefully. He was pushed out, forced into early retirement by his own board of directors while he was still recovering from what happened to me. They said the kidnapping had made him unstable, unreliable, too paranoid to run a company anymore. It wasn't true. He was terrified, yes, but he wasn't unstable. He was a father who'd almost lost his son and wanted better security, better protocols, and the board used that against him. Who ran the board? Nathan's expression darkened. The same man I've spent 72 hours confirming ordered the hit on your father. Emma's breath caught. The message wasn't a lie. Then? The message was half a truth wearing the mask of a whole one, Nathan said. Which is exactly the kind of thing this man specializes in. He's been controlling the narrative around himself for 20 years. He didn't get where he is by being careless. Then say his name, Emma said, planting her feet, refusing to move another step until she had it. Right now, Nathan. I've had enough half-truths to last a lifetime. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, and Emma watched something settle in him, a decision finally made, a line finally crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Gerald Whitfield, he said. Emma's whole body went cold. The Whitfield Foundation. The gala. That was his event. His family's charity. Yes. He spent 2 decades cultivating an image of generosity and civic virtue, while quietly running one of the most sophisticated criminal financing networks this city has ever seen, laundered through shell donations, fake grants, foundations that exist on paper and nowhere else. Your father stumbled into evidence of an earlier version of that same operation the night he saved me. Whitfield ordered him silenced permanently 3 years later, once he realized your father had never actually stopped watching. He was at the gala. His voice shook. I might have shaken his hand. I might have thanked him for hosting. I know, Nathan said, and for the first time, real anguish broke through his composure. I've been building a case against him for years, financial records, testimonies, paper trails buried under layers of shell companies. I was close. I thought I had time to finish it quietly, cleanly, without ever putting you in danger. But that message means he already knows I'm close. He knows you exist. And he's trying to turn you against me before I can move. Why would he do that instead of just silencing me too, like he did my father? Because killing the woman America just watched me publicly protect in front of 300 witnesses would be the single stupidest thing he could do. Nathan said grimly. He's smarter than that. He wants to isolate you, make you doubt me. Because the moment you doubt me, you stop trusting the one person actually positioned to protect you and expose him. Emma sank into the nearest chair, the weight of it all pressing down at once her father. Her mother's 20 years of silence, a man's face she'd smiled at over champagne who had ordered her father's murder, and the billionaire standing in front of her whose every motive she suddenly wasn't sure she could separate from his own history of loss and vengeance. How do I know you're not doing exactly what you're accusing him of? She said quietly. Controlling the narrative, managing me. The question landed like a slap, and Nathan absorbed it without flinching, though something in his face cracked slightly at the edges. You don't, he admitted. Not with certainty. All I can offer you is everything I have, every document, every account record, every year of evidence I've gathered. I'll put all of it in your hands, right now tonight, and let you decide for yourself whether I'm telling the truth. Do it, Emma said. Nathan didn't hesitate. He led her upstairs to a private office, unlocked a cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder of documents, bank transfers, board meeting minutes, photographs, handwritten notes in a private investigator's careful shorthand spanning nearly 2 decades. Emma spent the next hour reading in silence, while Nathan sat across from her, saying nothing, letting the evidence speak in a language louder than his own defense ever could. By the time she looked up, her hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore, from clarity. This is enough to destroy him, she said. It's enough to start, Nathan corrected, but going public now, before the final pieces are locked down, gives him time to disappear his money and vanish behind lawyers for years. I need one more piece of witness willing to testify that Whitfield gave the order directly. Someone who was in the room when it happened. Does that person exist? Nathan's expression turned grim. He does. A former associate of Whitfield's, living under a different name for his own protection. I've been trying to reach him for months. He's terrified, and rightfully so. Emma's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She looked down, and the colored rained slowly from her face. Nathan. He was at her side instantly. What is it? She turned the screen toward him, hands shaking. It was a photograph, grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. A man's body, slumped in the driver's seat of a parked car, blood on the window behind him, Beneath it, a single line of text. He was going to testify. Now he isn't. You're running out of time, Mr. Caldwell. Nathan's hands went rigid around the phone as he stared at the photograph, and Emma watched something shift in him, not panic, but a cold, focused rage she hadn't seen since the ballroom. That was our witness, he said quietly. That was the only person who could put Whitfield away with a single sworn statement. He's dead because of us. Emma whispered, because we got close. He's dead because of Whitfield, Nathan corrected sharply, then softened when he saw her flinch. I'm sorry. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry that I let myself believe we had more time than we did. May's phone buzzed a third time. Another message from the same unknown number. Drop this now, or you're next, Ms. Brooks. Your father made the same mistake once. Don't make it twice. Emma read it and felt something inside her go very still, not the fear Whitfield was clearly hoping for, but something colder, harder. Forged from 20 years of grief she'd only just learned the shape of. He thinks I'm going to run, she said. Emma, he murdered my father, she said, cutting Nathan off, her voice shaking but steady underneath it, for saving a child's life. He's been playing the hero at charity galas for 20 years while quietly ordering people killed to protect that lie, and he just threatened me thinking I'd fold. She looked up at Nathan, eyes hard. I'm not folding. Nathan studied her for a long moment, something like a breaking through the fear on his face. Your father would be proud of you right now. Don't, Emma said, voice cracking despite herself. Don't say that yet. We haven't won anything. We lost our only witness. We haven't lost everything, Nathan said, already moving. Already thinking 3 steps ahead in a way Emma was beginning to recognize as exactly how he'd survived 20 years of quiet warfare against a man everyone else believed was a saint. The evidence I showed you, the financial records, the board minutes, that's still real, still admissible. What we're missing is a direct link connecting Whitfield to the order that killed your father specifically. But I think there's another way to get it. How? Nathan's jaw tightened. We make him confess himself. That's insane. Why would a man like that ever confess to anything? Because men like Whitfield don't fear prison. Nathan said, they fear humiliation. They fear losing the mask. If I can corner him publicly, force him to either explain himself or expose himself trying not to, his own arrogance will do what a dozen documents can't. And if he just has us both killed instead, like he did the witness? That's why we're not doing this quietly, Nathan said. We're doing it in front of every camera in Chicago. 3 days later, the Whitfield Foundation hosted its annual donor recognition dinner, the same ballroom. The same chandeliers, the same wealthy faces who had watched Emma get grabbed by the wrist without lifting a finger 2 weeks earlier. This time, Emma walked in beside Nathan not as a records clerk delivering paperwork, but as a woman the entire city already knew by name, cameras flashing the second she stepped through the doors. Gerald Whitfield greeted them at the entrance like nothing happened, his smile warm, practiced, dangerous. Nathan and Ms. Brooks, what a pleasure to see you again. I do hope the last event didn't leave to poor an impression of our little gatherings. Not at all, Nathan said, his voice pleasant control, giving away nothing. In fact, I have something I think your guests would find fascinating tonight. Whitfield's smile flickered, just barely. Oh, a tribute, Nathan said, to a man who saved my life 20 years ago. I think it's long overdue. He didn't wait for permission. He walked to the small stage at the front of the ballroom, took the microphone from a startled event coordinator, and turned to face 300 guests who had no idea what was about to unfold. 20 years ago, Nathan began, his voice carrying easily across the silent room, I was kidnapped and held for 9 days. A man named David Brooks, a security guard. Nobody important, or so everyone believed, risked his life to save mine. 3 years later, that same man was murdered, his death disguised as a car accident, because he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to see. A ripple moved through the crowd. Whitfield's face had gone very still near the back of the room. For 20 years, I've searched for the truth of what happened to him, Nathan continued. And for 20 years, I found nothing but locked doors until 3 days ago, when the man who could have finally confirmed everything was murdered before he could testify. Gasps rippled through the ballroom now, phones rising. Cameras turning toward the stage, toward Whitfield, whose composure was visibly cracking under 300 watching eyes. Nathan, Whitfield said. Stepping forward, voiced Ite. This is hardly the place. I have documents, Nathan said, holding up the folder Emma had read 3 nights earlier. Financial records connecting a decades-old shell network to an early kidnapping ring. Board minutes showing my own father was forced out after questioning irregularities in that same network. And bank transfers showing exactly who benefited most from both. You're accusing me, Whitfield said, his voice rising, control finally slipping. Based on paperwork and grief-fueled speculation. In front of my own guests, at my own event. I'm not accusing you of anything, Nathan said calmly. I'm simply presenting facts. The accusation is something you're doing to yourself right now, in front of every camera in this room. Whitfield's face had gone pale, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly at his sides. Emma stepped forward then, standing beside Nathan, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. My father died protecting a child he didn't even know, she said, looking directly at Whitfield. He never asked for recognition. He never asked for anything. All I want is the truth, and I think everyone in this room deserves to know exactly who they've been applauding at these galas for 20 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Whitfield opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and in that hesitation, in that half-second where a guilty man searched desperately for words that didn't exist, every phone in the room captured it. The footage would be everywhere by morning. Gerald Whitfield, cornered, silent, guilt written across his face in front of 300 witnesses and a live-streaming crowd of millions online. This is outrageous, he finally managed. But it came out weak, defensive, nothing like the smooth, philanthropic voice he'd cultivated for 2 decades. I want my lawyers. I want this room cleared immediately. Your lawyers will have plenty to discuss, Nathan said quietly. Once federal investigators finish reviewing everything I've handed them this afternoon. Whitfield's face drained completely of color. By morning, it wasn't just a scandal, it was a collapse. Federal agents arrested Gerald Whitfield within 48 hours, financial records seized. Shell companies unraveling one by one under scrutiny they'd evaded for 20 years. Executives who had laughed at Emma that first night lost their positions within the week. Their names dragged through the same headlines that had once celebrated them. The people who had watched Sinclair grab her wrist and done nothing found their names quietly erased from every board they'd once sat on. Nathan refused every opportunity for personal victory laps. No press conferences celebrating his role, no interviews framing himself as the hero. Instead, he created something else entirely, the David Brooks Foundation. A scholarship fund for ordinary workers who performed extraordinary acts of courage, funded permanently, administered independently, named after a man the world had almost forgotten. Emma didn't disappear into Nathan's world of wealth and comfort either. She kept her apartment. She kept her job at the records office for another 6 months, insisting on earning her own way before eventually stepping into a leadership role at the foundation her father's sacrifice had inspired, not because Nathan offered it to her, but because she'd built the credibility to deserve it herself, one honest month at a time. Their relationship grew slowly, deliberately, built on something steadier than the drama that had introduced them. Nathan learned that protecting someone wasn't about controlling their path, it was about standing beside them while they found it themselves. Emma learned that trust, once broken by 20 years of silence, could still be rebuilt, patiently, honestly, one truth at a time. Months later, the Whitfield Foundation's old ballroom reopened under new ownership, hosting its first annual David Brooks Courage Awards. Emma walked in beside Nathan, not as a records clerk clutching a folder for protection, not as a woman rescued from humiliation, but as the respected director of a foundation that had already changed dozens of lives in its short existence. The entire room rose to its feet the moment she entered, applause echoing off the same chandeliers that had once watched Hurst, and alone and unseen. Nathan took her hand quietly as the applause settled, leaning close enough that only she could hear him. "Your father saved my life once," he said. "You taught me how to deserve it." Emma smiled, tears gathering but never falling. 20 years of grief finally settling into something that felt, for the first time, like peace. The greatest victory was never about defeating the powerful. It was proving, in front of everyone who had ever doubted her, that dignity outlasts humiliation, that quiet courage outlives silence, and that the truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds its way home.